Let's move to the wide receiver group. How bad is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what's your flavor? Like, what do you need, right? You know, what kind of ingredients do you already have in your offense? That's kind of where you're at, because you just have so many different people. Like Josh Downs, Quentin Johnston. It's like, are we going to debate if they're wide receiver 3 or 4? You know what I mean? But it's like they're so different what they can offer.
Right.
I get concerned with these smaller guys, specifically like a Tank Dell and Zay Flowers. I don't know if they're big enough to play in the NFL. Like, flat out. Like, we haven't seen anybody that type of size pan out at all whatsoever. I think overall it's an interesting group. I wouldn't be surprised if you see some day 3 guys really pan out and have strong production, or even third-round guys.
Yeah.
And see some early busts. So, you know, I think with this class, I don't think there's any reason to really debate, like, rankings at all. Like, I get why anybody would have this guy here, this guy there, but it's just so unknown. I think situation is so important here. The only like strong take I have is that Jackson Smith-Njigba was wide receiver 1, and I get he's not like super fast. He doesn't have burner speed, and the hammy is an issue, you know, like Chris said on the show yesterday. But man, winning in tight quarters, that's one of the most important things a wide receiver does. He does it better than anybody. The short area quickness, you saw it in the agility drills. It's absurd. He has body control. The ball skills are there. Man, I really do think, assuming the hammy's fine, nothing to worry about, short or long term, I would be shocked if he didn't pan out. I would take him top 12, wouldn't blink about him.
Yeah, I think his floor is very high.
Yeah.
Like, what he's good at should translate. Like, Chris is, I think he does both of the things that Chris was talking about, which is, you know, when you look at a guy and he's open, you have to ask yourself, did he get open, or was he just open on the play because, you know, the defense sucks, or the play call worked? You know, was he schemed open, or did he get open? I think for Smith-Njigba, it's both. Like, there are plays where he gets open. He beats people with his route running. He actually earns the separation himself. There's also a ton of plays in that offense where he's just open. Like, the offense works, and he's wide the hell open, and, you know, somebody finds him with the ball. It's not that it's the Tennessee offense where, like, Jalen Hyatt is open basically every play. But there is a lot of it in there. Like, you have to factor. So when you look at his production, and it's like, there's a reason that they move everybody into the slot who's their best receiver, right? It gets them more wide open than it would if they were playing outside. Garrett Wilson was in the slot. Then Garrett Wilson moved outside to make room for Jackson Smith-Njigba, and now Marvin Harrison Jr. is moving into the slot. Like, that's where they put the best receiver, because in addition to being the best, it's going to be the most wide opens. You're going to have the most production. So when people look at Jackson Smith-Njigba's crazy season, they're like, oh, he had more production than Olave and Garrett Wilson. It's like, yeah, but he was also playing the position that will get more production than the guys outside of him. So, like, you have to bear that in mind, but I agree with you. Like, he does get open as well. The wide receiver position was really interesting. Like, listening to Chris when he does his rankings, right? It's fascinating because he does as good a job as anybody at coming to the draft with his, like, in a vacuum. Like, I'm not listening to the noise. I'm just going through the tape, and I'm going to figure out whatever my rankings are, right? And that's how you end up with a safety that's consensus 200 and something in the board in the first round.
I wish everybody would do that.
Right, which
Yeah,
I love as a
love
concept,
that.
right? Because it's all about your own opinions on these players, and yet everybody, like, gets dragged into this groupthink of, like, here's the rankings, and you can tinker with it a little bit, and people were okay with that. But as soon as you go too far, well, now you're just Chris Sims trolling for clicks, right? Now you're ridiculous, or now you're Chris Collinsworth. You're just, you know, doing this for trolling, right? But, like, the receiver position this year in particular, I've kind of been wondering if I did a better job of completely isolating myself from the consensus or the noise, what my rankings would look like. Like, when I went through the tape, I love Jonathan Mingo, and I put him 8th when I first did the rankings. When I redid them for when I was relabeling my notes, I bumped him up to 7th. And I'm kind of wondering if I did this without knowing that Jackson Smith-Njigba was supposed to be the number 1 guy, and Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston was Renner's number 1 guy. Like, without knowing any of that, how high would I have put Mingo based off just coming to his tape? Because I keep watching that dude's tape, and, like, I don't see the negative here. Like, I like everything. The only negative is why he didn't have more production. And as much as I don't have a good answer for that, I don't see a problem with it either. Like, he had good production last year. His quarterback wasn't great. Like, I I'm not using that as a reason to not draft him high. So, like, should I just be saying this guy's like wide receiver 1 or 2?
Do it. You know, I'm going to hype you up right now. Move him up your board.
I should.
Tweet it. Say he's wide receiver 2. What's stopping you?
Problem is, Jordan Addison is my wide receiver 1, so I'd have to put him above Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Is he really?
He is, yeah.
Oh, wow. All right. I think
that's the one where I stuck with that from before coming to all these guys. Like Jordan Addison jumped out at me watching Kenny Pickett tape. And I'm like, that guy's really, really good.
Yeah.
And then you went through and you watch him at USC as well. You're like, he's still really, really good. And, okay, Jackson Smith-Njigba was good too. But I have more confidence that Addison can win in more ways. Like, I don't know if Jackson Smith-Njigba is more than a slot guy at the next level. He might be. I think we're probably too quick to label that as who he's just a slot receiver. That's all he can do. He might be able to play outside and be an X. Like, he's got the footwork for it. He's got the size. He's not – like, I don't see a reason he definitely can't do that, which seems to be like a foregone conclusion of he isn't going to be.
I respect that. He's just so smooth.
Yeah.
He's just super smooth.
And he's got a really weird movement style. Like, he doesn't move conventionally, which is, I think, a good thing for a wide receiver because DBs, like, so much are keying off wide receiver movements, like what they're doing. Like, literally, that's their job. If you're playing any form of man coverage or pattern matches, you're reading how the receiver is moving. If that guy is moving unconventionally, it doesn't even matter why, it's harder, right? Because you don't get the same reads, you don't get the same keys. So the fact that he has a strange movement style and, you know, he deliberately overemphasizes, over-accentuates like fakes and stuff, like it's why he gets so open. It's why he's able to separate really well.
Make up for the lack of muscle mass,
right?
You know, because I mean that's a big thing. He was super thin. You know, can he really consistently win despite having that frame? I mean, I have him as wide receiver too. I think he's going to be
Addison.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a very productive player in the NFL. I think situation does matter there, just like with any other wide receiver. But I don't hate that. You have him wide receiver 1, so it's Addison, Mingo now for your 1 and 2. No, I like that. I mean, I have Smith-Njigba, Addison, Downs, Johnston, Michael Wilson.
Yeah.
That's my top 5.
Michael Wilson's good. That's good. Like, I love that as a shout because I liked Michael Wilson. Where did I have him? I have him at 11, and he's another guy that I'm like, I really should push him higher than that.
The polish that he has. I mean, like, we all know, like, it's a running joke. Stanford, they're just like these big guys that don't separate and they can win in contested situations. And honestly, you look at the rest of their wide receiver depth chart last year, that's exactly what it was. But Michael Wilson, he could do that. But man, he can separate. You saw it at the Senior Bowl, too. He has some of the best cookage tape in the entire draft class. Problem is the durability, right? Yeah. And he's also doesn't have like even an average speed. It's not that great from a long speed perspective. The medicals are just really scary. So, I mean, that's where it's like, if you have him as your 11, if you have him at like 15, like, I'm not going to blame you.
That's the biggest thing.
It goes back to like the JSN hammy issue. If like that's your reasoning with it, I get it because, you know, we've seen situations like this just not pan out. You know, I'm just kind of looking past the medicals and just from a pure tape standpoint, when he is healthy, man, he's got it. He's definitely got it. And you could say it could be said for Kayshon Boutte, who I have not too far behind Michael Wilson. You know, I watched I watched 2022 and I was like, yeah, I'm kind of with everybody else here. And then I was like, I'm going to go back and watch his true freshman. And then I was like, I'm back in. He's got it. You know, he's first round pick. No, not really, but third round. Definitely in there. Just his footwork, suddenness, it's definitely there. But yeah, I mean, he has some injury questions too, and you know, of course, some of the other stuff. But you know, this class is just, again, pick your flavor. Whoever you like a Mingo, wide receiver 2, take him top 20. You do it, Sam. Yeah. You do that. Who cares? Some team's probably going to take Mingo first round, and it's going to be like,
it's sounding like that's a real possibility. Like,
I would have gone another direction, but I respect the hell out of it.
Yeah, Michael Wilson, the biggest thing I think is that injury history. Like, he's played in 5 years and has less than 1,000 passing snaps in those 5 years. Like, only been over 200 1 year. It's a pretty extensive injury history for him, which is scary enough, I think. You know, it's always tough to gauge whether a guy's just been unlucky or whether he actually has durability issues, you know, injury proneness or whatever. But I think that's reason enough to be like, talent-wise, he probably is a top 5 receiver, but can I rely on him being that going forward? Probably not. So let's keep him a little bit lower.
The question I have too with him, and like if he was in another offense, he was. I mean, you could say this about a lot of people, but if he was in a different offense, what would we think of him?
Right.
Like if he was playing with, not like this is not a slight to Tanner McKee. I just didn't really like the philosophical design of the Stanford offense. I just didn't.
Good.
Yeah, it was kind of like a little bit of what Wake did, and it was weird.
That's the only element of Renner's Tanner McKee love that actually makes a little bit of sense. Is like the offense definitely didn't help him.
Exactly, and that's kind of where I go to it. It's like I think consensus-wise he'd be a lot higher if he was in another offense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Are there any wide receivers other than, I mean, we've already talked a little bit about the guys you have really high. Are there any other kind of dudes you absolutely love that you have ranked way higher than other people?
I like Rashee Rice. I like Cedric Tillman. Again, it's like completely different because if you look at that same range, it's like, do you need a Jalen Hyatt or do you need a Cedric Tillman? Because they do completely different things. So it's like impossible to like firmly rank them. Cedric Tillman, ball skills, exceptional. Again, the role is what you kind of have an issue with, but I think everything else, just he's big, he's physical, can take on contact along the route with no issue at all whatsoever. Good explosiveness, got some hops. And I think there's a lot to like there. Like I said, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell. Like if you want to take him, if you want to take Zay top 25, it's great. I mean, he was an exceptional player at Boston College. It's just the size thing I have issues with. Like, can he beat NFL man coverage? That I don't know. We don't know. Yeah. I have reasons to think that he just doesn't. He's not going to be able to do that. And Tank Dell, probably the same thing. But, man, if you want to take Tank Dell top 50, like I'm not going to say you're an idiot because he was dangerous in college. The production off the charts.
I love Tank Dell.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tank Dell, he's my number 4 wide receiver.
Oh.
I love Tank Dell. Tank Dell
Tank
Dell and Mingo, the two guys I'm really high on relative to everybody else.
Who's 3? JSN?
3 is Quentin Johnston. I don't like Quentin Johnston, but I buy in enough to the things he's good at and the sort of physical ability that he has to be like, in this draft class, like I can't really drop that much lower than that. Like I wouldn't pick him, at the time, my initial sort of exposure to him, right, was, all right, Renner has this guy as the number 1 receiver in the draft. I'm going to start with him when I go through the tape. Let's level look. And like, you watch his tape and you're like, really? So my first reaction was to message Renner. I'm like, are you sure the TCU guy isn't actually terrible? He was like, yeah. And he sort of sent me these plays of him doing good things. It's like, all right, look, he's bad at a lot of things that are quite important to being a good wide receiver in the NFL. But he is big, fast, and explosive. He's not just a sort of vertical guy. He can stop as well, which is an important part of like, can you actually be more than a one-trick pony? On these hitch routes, he's able to catch and turn upfield and make big plays out of that. Like, I think there's enough there where you're like, all right, I'm willing to bet on that, the bottom of the first round. Let's grab him and let's see if we can develop him into something more. Like the sort of DK Metcalf pathway of, I don't need him to do much more than that right away, and we'll figure out what he can be down the line. I think I wouldn't have him 1, I wouldn't have him 2, but then you get into this group of receivers. It's like, how many other guys can you really push ahead of him before it's like, we're probably being too harsh at this point?
I'm right there with you. The stop-start ability at that size, that's pretty darn good. The ball skills is kind of like the big thing I have issues about.
Yeah.
I mean, just body catches everywhere. But I'm with you. End of round 1 is where I would go with him.
Right.
I think if you got, I think that's another thing too. You can't have Quentin Johnston too low, but if you have him 1, I'm not gonna discount that, but I would have him right around there like you.
Yeah. The only thing I get having him 1 if your argument is the other guys can't be a number 1. Right? If your argument is Jackson Smith-Njigba is only a slot guy, Jordan Addison at his size is only a slot guy, like I need an X receiver. If you need an X receiver, I get having Quentin Johnston as your number 1 guy. Like that, it's not a draft that's stuffed full of those guys. So if that's your goal, I get having him as your number 1. That's like, I have a lot of sympathy. It makes for sort of sometimes really awkward reading or digesting when you're looking at people's rankings that do it this way, but there's a few people out there who really like break down receiver and corner into like a lot of subsets, like zone corner, man corner, off, all these kinds of things. And then slot receiver, X receiver, flanker. It's a pain in the ass sometimes when you're looking at them and like, this is sort of being too granular, but It does make a lot of sense in this draft when you're like comparing Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tank Dell, and Quentin Johnston. You're like, these are three wildly different receivers. Like, what are we even doing trying to compare them to each other? They're not playing the same position in the NFL. Or Jalen Hyatt versus Cedric Tillman. I mean, they came from the same offense, but they don't play the same position. It's technically labeled wide receiver. It's not the same.